My name's Kelly Rula. I'm with the Urban Freight Lab at University of Washington. We just released a white paper called Biking the Goods about cargo bike adoption and with recommendations for cities to help accelerate the thing we're all here to do today, which is micromobility in cities. We are very excited. Go check it out, urbanfreightlab.com or Google Biking the Goods. But that is going to be our grounding theme today. We're going to talk about sort of the format. We organized our recommendations in the paper. And then we have all of these amazing experts here that are on the ground doing this work in cities to really speak to what it's like to implement commercial deliveries by cargo bike in the cities in North America. So I do want to highlight we've got European counterparts here. We focused the paper on North America because it's so different here. We are seeing a lot of things happen across the water that aren't quite happening here yet. So we really did try to focus, and all of these panels are folks that work in the trenches here in North America, in North American markets. All right, I want to let everybody introduce their company really quickly, and then we'll get into an exciting discussion. So first, Franklin.
Hello, everyone. My name is Franklin Jones. I'm CEO and founder of Beeline Urban Delivery. We are a cyclo-logistics company based out of Portland, Oregon. We were founded in 2009, so we've been doing cyclo-logistics for 15 years. I'll leave it at that.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Thanks, Kelly. My name is Ben Morris. I'm the CEO and founder of Coaster Cycles. We build electric cargo bikes and trikes for the last mile delivery space, and we have been doing this since 2005.
Oh,
I'm not even close to 2005, so not gonna take a shot there. I am Joseph. I'm co-founder of Zoba. We are a fleet optimization company, and we've kind of an interesting background in that when I first came to this conference, which was, I think, 2018, one of the first one they had, at that point, we were focused entirely on optimization for shared mobility systems. So asset positioning, rebalancing, charging operations, and have since mixed our business more into the logistics space, where we touch a lot of last mile and increasingly cargo bike delivered last mile, and try to apply a lot of what we've learned into that space.
Hi, Stuart Hyden. I'm president and COO of Net Zero Logistics and our affiliates Cornucopia Logistics and Avant Business Services. I've got them beat, all of our young panel.
oh,
I was around in logistics just after the wheel came out. And so I've seen a lot of transformation in the industry from carbon emissions to where we are. Excited to be here. Thanks, Kelly.
awesome. Okay, so you can see this is our esteemed and well-aged panel here to really bring the expertise to the end of the day. So what is the Urban Freight Lab? We are a research group out of the University of Washington. We study, you guessed it, urban freight. We also have a working group, which a number of these folks have been a part of over the years, where we bring private sector players in the urban logistics landscape together with public sector members like Seattle DOT, New York City DOT, and academic researchers to do well-informed and sort of groundbreaking research on this topic. So we, as I said, we just pushed out this white paper, which we'll be talking about today. And I'm going to start with sort of our key themes that we organized our recommendations in the paper. We tried to sort of, bucketize things so that it was easy to remember and have some themes, which we'll hit on a few times with this group. So infrastructure, we've heard about that today on this stage, bike lanes, bike parking, things of that nature, policies and regulation. We could have many, many panels on that topic, but how do we regulate what is a cargo bike? How is it regulated? Who regulates it, etc.? Things like incentives. So that's both rebates, which we've heard talk of, as well as things like business subsidy or operational subsidy, which we'll get into. And then I love this one, culture and education, which again, I think the people in this room, this really resonates, but the culture around biking and how we train people to safely do commercial deliveries on bikes. It is not the same as driving in a van, but it still takes training and thought and process. Okay. Here we go. Sorry, like levity. I'm trying to get some laughs here, end of the day. Okay. All right. So we're going to start with Ben. So that's the order I have. So this panel is all about how we take cargo bikes to scale. As someone that transitioned cycle manufacturing company from maybe more people focused to more cargo focus in recent years, what excites you about this delivery space that you're operating in?
Yeah, I think it's important to know, like, the transition from people to cargo was somewhat strategic. We move way more cargo in city centers than we move in people in city centers every day, right? And that's attributed to a lot of problems in our cities. And so I think, as you sort of alluded to before, across the pond, we've seen a lot of progression in the movement of goods and in city centers. And we're finally starting to see the momentum right now, I would say more broadly in North America. And we sit in an interesting space as an OE. So we get to collaborate oftentimes with academia, but also with the logistics companies and with the cities and municipalities. And I would say, of very recent, we are finally starting to see the headwinds behind us. And cities are coming and saying, we want to do this. And the private sector and the carriers are saying, we want to do this too. And we're starting to see that broader collaboration. A lot of that is evoked in this white paper that just came out. And I would encourage everybody to read that because it was some great work. And I'm very excited about where things are in the future.
So what have been some of the biggest challenges, though, that you've seen? You said there's some positive momentum moving forward, but I know that you've worked with carriers and post operators to try to sort of evangelize the cargo bike or the cargo trike. What are some of those challenges you're seeing of folks that want to make the conversion?
Yeah, I think so very specific to the hardware piece, I'll say that we as an industry need to grow up and we need to start thinking and operating like the automotive space, because many of the customers with whom we work with are automotive fleet engineers, and they're accustomed to purchasing and evaluating vehicles, right? So there's something that we have to do on the hardware side to start thinking, designing, engineering, and building for that. And then I think on the city side and the public policy side, infrastructure is one that always comes up, right? How are we able to build infrastructure that could support this type of modality and these types of deliveries? That's ever evolving. We see a lot of news of recents coming out in New York as well as Seattle that I think is going to continue to push those initiatives forward. And so again, challenges certainly do exist, but I think we're seeing a lot of positive momentum right now.
So what is your advice to companies? I know you said grow up, but let's maybe take that a step further as they think about product development in this space. Again, commercial use of their devices. And similarly, what advice do you have to cities?
Yeah, I think, and Franklin will be able to speak about the product a lot as the actual operator. Cities have to start saying, there's a lot of data and a lot of study that has come out that's talked about the efficiency of cargo bikes and cargo trikes and quads, and how they're able to deliver packages more efficiently, more cost effectively, and ultimately reduce congestion in cities. And so cities are going to have to find a way to say, how do we incorporate this into our ecosystem? How do we create loading zones, green loading zones, potentially mobility lanes? We often have gotten so accustomed to talking about a bike lane, but as we've seen today, specifically this event, it's no longer bikes, right? The modalities are changing, they're evolving, they're actually getting bigger. And much of the infrastructure that currently is in place today doesn't specifically support all of these modalities. And so, working collaboratively across the industry is something that's of keen importance. And I finally feel like we're doing that together as a group. And that's really exciting for me.
Great. Joseph, we're going to move to you for a few questions here. So your company has a background in more shared micromobility optimization and fleet positioning, but is increasingly seeing opportunities in the logistics space. So what are some learnings from the shared micromobility space that can translate into the cargo delivery space?
Yeah, there's a couple of obvious ones. So, environment matters a lot. What you're dealing with in terms of infrastructure, climate can matter. And you're often working in a sort of environment where much of your operation is more center to the city. So you're not talking about depots that are on some highway and you're driving in. Much of the operations you're running in shared and in some of these cargo operations are in kind of tighter areas where you have micro fulfillment centers, things like that. Maybe the one that is, I think, top of mind for a lot of the operators we're speaking to now is kind of the same across the two spaces, which is that the kind of scale and then find efficient unit economics game seems to be up. And so people are really focused on how do you get sort of any incremental efficiency in the business at a unit economic level before you do any sort of scaling. And that feels new and different and very kind of top of mind in both spaces.
So kind of dovetailing off that, what are those kind of considerations that a traditional fleet manager, so this could be even, they operate a fleet of vans or trucks, might consider if they want to introduce cargo bikes into their fleets?
Yeah, so at risk of saying infrastructure too much, I think that the kind of obvious one that comes into consideration when you start to look at these different types of modalities ends up being the environment you're operating in that starts to probably become much more different market to market, as opposed to if you're dealing with kind of rough archetypes of a few different kinds of cities and more, having fulfillment centers on the edge of a city. So when you're looking at kind of more of these multimodal fleets or mixing in cargo bikes, it's often a question of, being smarter about where you're operating, what the opportunities are there, and kind of what the makeup of the business looks like and how that interacts with your hard constraints of the city.
And I know y'all do some work in Europe. So I know we were just kind of smashing on our neighbors across the ocean. But what are some things that you're seeing in Europe in terms of how to scale cargo bike adoption that maybe are interacting or interfacing with your line of business and your line of work?
Yeah, definitely. So we have deployed our software in order of magnitude 300 or so cities in the US, Europe, and parts of Asia. And so we've kind of gotten a few different flavors on where some of the unique opportunities are, kind of how those regions differ. I'd say between the US and Europe's constituted roughly half of our business historically. The big difference is the cities are often just much more amenable to biking. And again, like that skews towards the shared side, but you just see a higher baseline sort of latent demand in the markets because you can address more users. It's not, I live in Boston, which is one of the safest biking cities in the US, probably. And there are hardly any bike lanes on my morning commute. And I think that's pretty representative of a lot of what you see in the US. So yeah, I'd say if I had to highlight one thing, it would probably be infrastructure, but you also see a variety of different policy measures, some of them more on the incentive side, some of them more punitive, like congestion pricing and the like, that have also facilitated cargo bikes becoming just a more financially smart move.
Shout out New York City. It's coming. Awesome. Thanks, Joseph. Okay, we'll move to Stuart. All right, Stuart, you won the Who's Been in Logistics the Longest game that we played earlier. But your company made the jump into cargo bikes about 5 years ago or so in New York City, doing a lot of work with Amazon, actually. So what is kind of one of the biggest challenges that y'all never anticipated despite your deep history in the logistics space?
Well, I think there's a couple. I mean, first of all is at the time that we did this, we would test bikes, and whatever someone liked, that's what we got. And at this point, I think the emphasis we've seen on the UL batteries because of a lot of different reasons, defects, etc. And also behind that, I think, is the testing behind the bikes, which really goes to, I think, Ben's point about moving this more into a vehicle style environment, that we're used to. So I think that's one, big takeaway that we didn't anticipate. I think the second, I think even bigger item we didn't anticipate is somehow we foolishly thought we were mechanics, and we painfully proved we're not. So we went out to outsource that to our partners at Motivate, and it's been a great, decision to do that, because that's not what we do. We don't fix things, we deliver them. And Kelly, I think kind of like the final thing is, I think the diversification of equipment, right? We sort of honed in on a particular manufacturer, and one of the things that we learned is that you can't do that. When you have supply chain issues, and when you have an OEM that's only producing their product line, that became problematic versus looking at manufacturers where you can go and you can purchase parts for your e-bikes that can be done at any bike shop. And so that was a hard lesson to learn, was a diversification, of the equipment portfolio.
That's great. And that builds on, if y'all were here for that earlier panel on maintenance, I think a lot of those themes came through in that panel as well. So I think one of the cool things when I first met Mark and Cornucopia Logistics, Net Zero Logistics, I remember he gave a presentation on worker safety and sort of how they do worker training for their cargo bike drivers. I still don't know. Is it drivers? I don't know. I feel like we haven't landed on a good term for the cargo bike. What do you guys say? Cargo bike drivers? Riders?
We call ourselves riders.
Okay, riders. Okay, cool. We're putting the flag in the sand today. Okay. So anyway, worker safety. And I wanted to hear about, I know that's been a big focus of your company. What do you think cities can do in addition to companies to really continue to promote safety around commercial biking?
Good question. I think that what we see particularly in logistics over the years is and while I'm not a regulation kind of dude, I think there has to be some regulation. We see it for many years and have always seen it with the US DOT and the standards and hours of service that go into operating a DOT regulated vehicle. And I think as the industry has matured, those are things that we need to do. I think it's not unfair to ask a biker or a rider to be licensed. I think that that's important. I think it's important for the companies to begin to look at licensing themselves. I think much like a driver's license, or if you go get a CDL license to drive a large piece of equipment, there's tests that you need to do. They don't need to be overbearing tests, but they need to be tests that need to be done. And then the other thing I think that, and we've worked on this, you mentioned Mark. Mark actually went out and had a professional video developed by a cable company that did a terrific job. There's just not a lot there that deals with what's called obstacle courses and things like that in biker training. We have them all the time with vehicles, right? There's tons of things out there, but in the industry, it's not there. And I think the final point on that is that it keeps out the bad actors, right? And we know we all have bad actors in the city, whether they're trying to take a piece of equipment and modify it, and then we get into a bike fire, and then, so I think all of those things, Kelly, go around, the safety and what we need to do and what I think that municipalities need to do. And also for the community members as well. You need to protect the community members because they're the ones that are buying the products that allow us to make money by delivering them.
Okay, last question for you. So Net Zero is working with City of Boston, which you'll learn about more tomorrow. I know Harper's here or coming in town. And one of the things I think that we highlight in the white paper that I haven't seen discussed as much in the literature is around subsidies for operations, which we talked a lot about in our lab meetings. So why are subsidies important for logistics providers transitioning fleets, new operating models, or going into new markets? Leading question.
Well, I think that, from an entrepreneurial perspective, you take some of the lift of the risk out of going into a new market in uncharted waters. The second part of it is when you're transitioning, and we just recently, as you mentioned, did that in the city of Boston. While they do have a lot of bike lanes, there's not really a lot of folks other than Ben, whose business is there with pedicabs, and a few of our friends at Breakaway. There's not somebody really doing what I would call a traditional e-cargo bike delivery that we have seen. And so it's very helpful, particularly when you're dealing with the city and the government regulations, to be able to come in and help formulate what that, needs to look like as well. I think the second thing that we really need to look at is that I just happened to be walking in the mall the other day, and I noticed, not that I would ever buy one, but I'm more of a motorcycle guy, but I noticed a Tesla, and it was like, I don't know, $20,000 in rebates that you can get. So I think that another thing that the agencies need to look at, and the regulatory bodies of the city, we ought to look at how do we create rebates for the purchase and moving to this type of equipment. I think the second thing is whether there's abatements. I think that that's a relatively important, component of it. And I think that those are things that the that the cities can do. And I think the development of micro hubs, which we've been on a lot of those calls with New York City DOT, where they're looking at building out micro hubs, and that leads us into obviously curb space and curb management. So those are all regulatory things that a city can do. And yes, go see Harper tomorrow. I think it's 10 o'clock. I think is her time tomorrow. So go see Harper, and she can fill you in a lot better than me.
Thanks, Stuart. So, okay, Franklin, I know that Stuart won for longest in logistics, but I do think Franklin wins for longest operating a cargo bike delivery service company, right? Yeah, okay, great. Franklin wins. All right, so you've been doing the actual deliveries longer than anyone up here. And your company operates in Portland, which we can say is one of the more bike-friendly cities in the United States. And yet, I'm sure your road has not been easy. Your journey has not been easy. So what have been the biggest operational challenges in the past few years, to start on the operational side?
Well, first a shout out to Portland and the bicycle infrastructure that was there before we even started in 2009, and the continued improvements of the bicycle infrastructure. We now have, I think, 3 dedicated bridges that you can go across. 2 of them are either freight, like bicycles, or transit only, so no cars. So there's some really amazing infrastructure that's going into Portland that allows us to do what we have been doing and to do what we want to do in the future. And I would say that's actually one of the amazing opportunities, is that we were able to enter the city and kind of take advantage of the entire infrastructure city landscape to do deliveries. We roll down bike lanes, we go down shared roads, we sometimes access bicycle paths, we park in the furnishing zones of the sidewalks. We do all sorts of things that traditional delivery vehicles just can't do. And that has given us a competitive advantage in the marketplace. And as we look to what that looks like in terms of built infrastructure going forward, I'm excited to hear about some of the curb management, about micro hubs, about rideshare areas. So I think that's all very positive. When I look at the challenges over the last years, we certainly have had a lot of challenges with our vehicles themselves. I want to just differentiate a lot of what we do from parcel and post, which is a lot of where you get energy around cycle logistics. Our primary business has been B2B delivery, and primarily with food and beverage. So we're moving 700 pounds at a time, multiple times a day, stopping at everything from grocery retail to breweries to bakeries to restaurants. We do home deliveries. We also work with Office Depot, Office Max, doing parcel deliveries into the city. So wide range of industry standards. And we've done it on essentially the same platform of this large Cycles Maximus platform. It's been a great platform to work off of, but the manufacturers in Europe, there's bespoke engineering, there's bespoke parts. It breaks, we fix it. It breaks, we weld it. We created our own rims. We created our, special spoke gauge at one point in time. We have a full-time staff of 2 mechanics, 7 days a week, to operate a fleet of 12 vehicles that are out there working very hard. So it's been really cool to see the collaboration of the what if vehicle in the future, and to see some of the new vehicles that are being determined and brought on. I think another challenge within the space is what is the right kind of vehicle platform in the sweet spot, not only for cost, but also for revenue as you step up into each platform. There is a revenue sweet spot for a utility bicycle, for a long john, for a tricycle, for a quad, and a quad with a trailer. What is that revenue sweet spot, and how do we capitalize that within the industry? I think is something that is often siloed, and something that I think is we're talking more and more. We talk about the cost side, but we don't necessarily talk about the revenue generation for operators. So those are things that are both been challenges and excitements. On the cultural aspect, certainly pre-pandemic, we saw line out the door of folks who want to come and ride and be part of the green revolution. The pandemic kind of quickly shut that down. The change of where people are working and how goods are being delivered drastically changed, and the labor market drastically changed. So in the past couple of years, we've kind of had the massive challenge of either not enough riders and the right amount of vehicles, or not enough vehicles and too many riders. And those riders tend to go in and out within about 6 months. They used to be with us for about 2 years. So that turnover rate has increased, and they still, our riders still kind of line up. They still come through the door. We do not as much outreach as we should, but the end result is that we are a less diverse workforce, and we basically are getting individuals who like to ride bikes coming to work for us. And to be able to scale, we need to have models that invite everybody into that green workforce.
Yeah, that's a great point, Franklin. Oh, that's the ferry, not feedback. Okay. So you, Beeline's been operating, I forget, you wanted me to call it something else, a micro food, or what did you want me to call it? Not just a micro hub, but
Oh, there's so many different terminologies. Is it is it an urban consolidation center? That's often what you talk about when you're looking at kind of the movement of parcels in. But when you look at the food and beverage side, everybody calls it a food hub.
food hub.
So
Okay.
it really, I don't really care. It's a spot to gather, aggregate, and then deliver by last mile.
Yeah. So, but Franklin has been operating this hub, which we see kind of talked about a lot. Micro hubs. Again, New York City put out a cool RFI recently. What types of infrastructure improvements do you think cities should be focused on to encourage the adoption of cargo bikes in cities by companies like yours?
I actually think micro hubs is right at the top of the list, especially the right sized, and looking at them as not necessarily closed boxes, but open boxes, and trying to figure out how to stack functions for those micro hubs, be them charging stations, be them, coffee shops that have training programs, anything to reduce the commute and increase the delivery within a tight neighborhood. So I think investing and helping entrepreneurs enter these kind of micro hubs or neighborhood hubs, what I like to call them, would be wonderful investments. I also think continuing looking at curb management, but let that curb management and the management of that right-of-way be led by data, so data-driven planning, and I think we have a lot to learn in the freight movement world from micromobility and MBS and CDS, and how do we take this data and share it into the cities so that they can help create the cities that we want to be operating in.
Thanks, Franklin. Joseph, did you want to add anything on interoperability and data over there?
We love a MDS shout out. So maybe just briefly on that point, totally agree. It's been incredible to see, and that started in the US. If anyone doesn't know, it's kind of a data standard that I believe started in LA. And it's kind of a set of information you have to give the city and make available. Started in the US, and then as operators started to go abroad, actually ended up being fairly common in Europe as well, where in parts of Europe they had other standards. But it's been this incredible example of you now have one kind of uniform thing you can look at to compare operators, see who has vehicles where, see even battery levels, things like that, depending on the city. So yeah, it's been a huge success in the micro space.
Okay, we have more time, so I have more questions. Quick fire rounds here. Okay, are we ready? Stay with us, guys. We're the last panel of the day. You got this. Then you can go take a cold shower before the after party. Like an ice cold shower. We're all going to do it. So not to just harp on challenges, but we talked about some challenges. I wanted to give an opportunity for folks to chime in. There are other things that, for this room of a lot of manufacturers and some city folks, like what are the challenges to getting into this space or to maintaining it or to being profitable? Like how do we be profitable and do cargo bike deliveries? I wanted to give an opportunity to add anything we haven't talked about yet across the board.
Well, I think that, talking about, you mentioned the manufacturers being in the room. The one thing that I think that I would recommend to them would be you got to stop thinking like a biker and start thinking like a van, because this is all about one thing, and that's capacity. How do I take a van that depending on the organization, is doing, let's say, 278 packages a day. How do I replace that van? How do I do that? What does my capacity have to look like? So I think you kind of start there, Kelly, and you work backwards. And that's going to be multiple turns, and that's going to be what it looks like, particularly in e-commerce and what we're seeing with the Asian market exploding. Some of you probably get stuff from Temu and Alibaba and other folks in the Indian market, and also what we're seeing in Europe. So capacity to me is where this game is going to get won and lost. And you got to start thinking about, I'm a van on a bike. How do I replace that capacity?
I have an idea. So I think one thing that some people talk about, but not everybody, is whether you're a very large logistics company or you're a flower shop that wants to use this type of modality, the service offering currently today is highly fragmented, right? And so if you say, I want to go adopt this type of modality, where do I buy hardware from? How do I maintain that hardware? Who do I go to buy insurance? How do I store it? What's trading look like for the drivers? How am I going to get repairs and parts done on this? And so right now, companies large and small have to sift through what limited options are currently available and say, okay, and they have to put this massive puzzle together. And so I think as an industry, we have to start working a lot more collaboratively to say, this is what a multi-service offering looks like, so that you can walk into a customer and say, for this price or for this cost per month, you get all of this. And so whether you are that large logistics company or that university or that government company or the local flower shop, right? You've kind of teed it up on a service, like a silver platter for them, and you've made it very easy to go and say, okay, this all makes sense. And we're getting there, I think, collectively, but we have some work to do to get that sort of done and done properly.
Any reactions or other thoughts on that?
I think there's a really interesting question about what is profitable and that profitability standard. And when you look at that from an independent operator to, a large incumbent operator, and what does it really take, as well as kind of balancing that with the common good. And what does it really mean for us to stand up cities that are truly sustainable, that are creating more of a livable community for everyone, that are creating jobs, that are green jobs, that are reducing CO2. When I look at this as a mission-driven B Corp company, I'm taking that very much into account in that equation of what is profitable. I also have to make money to keep myself going and growing, but there is certainly a balance that we need to be looking at in our cityscapes.
Great. I kind of want to end on the recommendation for cities. So, yeah, I know that I told y'all, I gave my panel, I said, well, there's another panel on batteries, so not going to talk about that as much. But I did want to see, are there some other topics related to cargo bikes that we haven't touched on yet that you really wanted to say something about? And I guess, Ben, I'm looking at you because I think I kind of glossed over your question. I will say that to give credit to these folks, they have really needed to get in the weeds on policy, working with cities, working with governments, because I think I'll let Ben talk more about it, but seeing the nexus between viability of product and regulation and the connection there. And I feel like I'd love if you would say a little bit more about how you feel like your policy space more than you were a few years ago.
Yeah, look, not by choice. That's not, we sort of get put into this, right? And customers come and say, is this legal? Oh, that's like a rabbit hole, right? And I think some of the legislation that caught a lot of news to just the attention in industry over the past couple months has been New York City DOT. There's been a lot of interesting proposals around lengths and widths and size and form factor and the like, which has been really interesting and I think progressive in its thinking. What I see right now is that the cities, there's multiple cities in the U.S. right now that are kind of looking to some of these early adopters and kind of saying, we're going to follow you, right? And so you guys go set the precedent and then we're going to go follow. And so now as an industry, we're starting to react to that and say, how are we ensuring that we've got the right product fit, we've got the right delivery solution to go meet what these new standards are? And it's highly fluid, and there's a lot of cities in the country, right? And they all have different initiatives, and so we're doing our best to kind of keep up with it.
Any other thoughts on policy? I don't know, Joseph, if you're seeing policies.
I'd defer to the operators on this.
Okay. All right. So we are almost at time here, and I wanted to give everyone an opportunity to say kind of where you think the biggest opportunity is or strategy for cities as they're thinking about what can a city government or regulator do to drive adoption of this. Again, we talked a little about what the private side looks like, but I'd love to hear, what do you think that is if you had to pick one? Stuart, you want to go first, or Franklin?
Yeah, I do think there's one thing that the cities do have to come to grips with at some point, and that is, how do you balance the commerce and the reduction of carbon footprint and getting vehicles off the road with also community members, right? The community members use the bike lanes. They don't really like us being in the bike lanes, but I think that the cities have got to find that balance of how do we have commerce that is carbonless as much as possible, and how do we balance that with the community members? And I think that's where, as Ben said, I think some of the geopolitical issues, come into play, because they all, nobody votes for us, but all the politicians get, voted for. So I think that that's kind of the big thing, Kelly. They're going to have to come to grips with how they manage that.
Having worked in a city, best of luck to those folks. All right, Joseph.
Yeah, not to steal Franklin's earlier point, but I do think that there is real opportunity for finding ways of communicating better with data and having better data standards. And a lot of that is probably could play more of a role, as it has in the shared space, in facilitating kind of more realistic, fruitful conversations around what else is needed infrastructure-wise or whatever it might be.
Agree. Ben.
I talk a lot. I guess, I think one of the things we're talking about, the movement of cargo bikes and cargo in cities, that today is being done by vans and vehicles, right? So cities have to recognize that this is not a van, this is not a vehicle, right? So we need to get some sort of traction and respect and governance around being able to adopt these modalities for the same way they've done for vehicles and trucks for many, many years. And I think if they can do that and start doing that, which we're seeing, we're going to see a lot of positive progress in the years to come.
Yeah, I think that this is it's not an either or question, it's a both and answer. And where I see that intersection between the both and is actually in the urban consolidation centers or the micro hubs. And if cities can work with operators and delivery companies to create co-located space so that you can then work on joint circularity, and really you can remove so many independent trips and reduce VMT by looking at what is the right tool for the job in the right spot of the city at the right time. And I think that would move mountains to achieve our goals.
Awesome. Thank you all. I know we're at time and Julia's about to bring out the big hook. So thank you guys. Enjoy the day in your cold shower.